Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Carlo Acutis was an Italian boy who died of leukemia in 2006. He was just 15 years old. He was a gamer and a computer prodigy, and you might be able to add saint to his list of accomplishments. Pope Francis has cleared the way for his canonization. Carlo would be the first millennial saint. Here's his mother, Antonia Salzano Acutis.
Carlo showed us that holiness is possible also today. He loved God overall. He did his first Holy Communion when he was 7 years old. So his life program was not to become the richest man, the most important football player, no? Carlo used to say that a life of success is a life where we will put God at the first place. If we don't do this, it's a failure life. It's a failure.
Kathleen Sprouse Cummings is a professor of history at the University of Notre Dame and the author of A Saint of Our Own, How the Quest for a Holy Hero Helped Catholics Become American. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
A millennial saint. How unusual is it to have a young person, a 15-year-old, recognized in this way?
Quite unusual, not unprecedented, but when it comes to people who are recognized by the church for their heroic virtue, it's usually because of something they did when they were an older person, an adult. So to have a child, someone who was essentially a child, died as a teenager recognized is somewhat unusual.
Tell us a little bit about Carlo Acutis. Who was he?
Carlo was a young Italian boy who was a very devout Catholic and from an early age had an extraordinary devotion to the Eucharist, and in fact brought his parents to church, was the one that encouraged them to go to church, which is different than the way it usually happens. He also was determined to spread the message of the Eucharist through new technology, through his computer skills, and he distinguished himself through that. And then he was diagnosed with leukemia and died at the age of 15.
He was known as God's influencer and the patron saint of the internet. Tell me a little bit more about how he used social media and life online to share his faith.
He developed a website that focused on Eucharistic miracles in the church, instances where bread and wine was transformed into the body and blood of Jesus Christ, as Catholics believe in the Eucharist, but where it showed visible signs of becoming the actual body and blood, things like a bleeding host. And he documented these and publicized them on a website and sought to evangelize, sought to spread the message. He had a deep, deep love for the Eucharist and believed, as the church believes, that it was the source and summit of Catholic life. And he wanted as many people as possible to partake of the Eucharist and to learn about it. And he harnessed technology to do that.
You can be internet savvy. You can be somebody who is deeply devoted to your faith. That doesn't make you a saint. You have to be able to have done miracles and have those miracles proven. What are the miracles that are being attributed to this young man?
Well, even before the miracles, the first thing you have to do is get the story out there. So the people who loved Carlo, who were touched by him, were really effective in doing that. And then that, in turn, led people all over the world to ask for Carlo's intercession when they needed healing. So the miracles that are authenticated that have led to where he is today, both involve young people. One was from a Brazilian child who had a congenital problem with the pancreas, and he was healed. And then the most recent one, that paved the way for his beatification in 2020. The most recent one involved another young person, a 22-year-old girl who was in a tragic bike accident in Italy, in Florence, and with the traumatic brain injury, she was not expected to recover, and her mother appealed to Carlo, and she did. So it's really interesting. Often when it comes to saints, the miracles that are involved in their cause align with their story. And in this case, the fact that they're both young people is pretty significant.
How is that? How are those authenticated? You said that was the word that you used. How are those acts authenticated such that people have determined that it was a miracle? Again, that's a big loaded word that has taken on all sorts of other resonance. But in this context, how do you do that?
Exactly. Well, the Catholic Church has a very rigorous and meticulous and defined process for doing that. So it's actually two stages. The first, a panel of doctors determines that the cure, it cannot be attributed to any, is inexplicable scientifically. They can't find any reason for the cure. But then it goes to a panel of theologians who determine that Carlo, in fact, was the intercessor who effected the miracle. Miracles, only God can make miracles. It's saints who who put in special favors, put in a word, if you will, with God to effect those favors. And so if if the parents of those children had also invoked other saints, if they had also, in addition to Carlo, say, asked for the intercession of Mother Teresa or someone like that, it would not have been authenticated because it has to be verified that it's Carlo himself who was the helper in this case.
What does it tell you that Pope Francis is paving the way for this 15-year-old internet-savvy young man to be canonized?
Canonization is primarily about holiness. So it's recognizing that Carlo lived a holy life. But canonization is also always about relevance. Only a select few of the faithful departed who are in God's eternal presence are recognized in this way. And so the ones that are, it's usually because something about their story speaks to the current moment or can speak to the current moment. And in Carlo's case, it's just a really powerful resonance. First of all, he was a young person. It's no secret that young people are increasingly disengaged from the church. So the hope is that in seeing themselves reflected in a saint, I know my students always talk about Carlo, he wore jeans and Nike sneakers. He's someone that they recognize. So there's a hope that it would help draw young people back to the church or intensify their faith. And then secondly, the Eucharist. There's a lot of confusion among Catholics today about what the Eucharist is, that it is the real presence of Jesus Christ. And so Carlo's efforts to educate about the Eucharist, that's another reason for his relevance today. And then finally, we're all concerned about the corrosive effects of social media. Here was a person who used social media for good. And so I think the Pope and the people in the dicastery for the causes of saints recognize that his powerful message about how you can use social media for good purposes will resonate throughout the world.
You mentioned your students. I mean, what resonance is there among those students with Carlos' story?
It's interesting. His story has really touched them. I remember when he was beatified in 2020, that was a semester when we were right in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we were studying the history of saints, and they were so interested in his story. And some of them were very devout, some of them were not devout at all. Some of them were no longer Catholic, but they found in his story somebody who knew how to work computers, who was really charismatic, and who was a regular guy, kind of just like them. What he teaches is that sainthood is possible for everybody. You don't have to be someone who prays all the time and is kind of boring. You can just be a regular old teenager and be a saint. And my students really resonate with that.
You could be cynical and say that at a time when church attendance among young people is declining, this is a strategic decision. It's a marketing decision in some ways. We're going to, that there is, to your point, there is an appeal in making this move because of what it might do to that constituency that you are trying to attract. What would you say to that?
I wouldn't say that's being cynical at all. Absolutely. Canonization is about marketing. It's about getting the story. Holy people die all the time, and they're missed by the people who loved them, who knew them. But when a holy person's story is spread beyond the local community, and in this case, throughout the world, it just means that the story touches someone. It's not cynical to say that the saints one of the whole reasons the church canonizes saints is so that people have an access point to God. I guess
the cynicism might come from people saying that that's all true, but that this is a way, in a moment of, it's not desperation, but you're trying to bring people in, and this is a tool to do that, and that whether a bar has been lowered or whether you turned your attention to this person specifically because of what they could do, that it's a means to an end in some ways.
Well, I think both can be true.
Yeah.
It can be the process was followed very meticulously. It was an accelerated process. It moved fairly quickly, but yes, obviously, it's designed to draw people. So I think it can be both. I don't think the recognition that it is about marketing negates Carlo's holiness or his meaning to the people who are devoted to him.
What happens next in this process?
Well, Pope Francis will call a consistory, which is a meeting of cardinals in Rome, and they will actually affirm the process, and a date will be set for the canonization. I suspect it will occur in early 2025. 2025 has been declared a Jubilee year by Pope Francis, which means pilgrims from all over the world are going to be coming to Rome for that year. And so I think Carlo's canonization could be a big part of those Jubilee celebrations.
What impact do you think that would have? Again, when people throw around phrases like God's influencer, the patron saint of the internet, it can sound, but at the same time, that attracts people, right? And it sticks with people.
It sticks with people. It draws them in. So yeah, I think his story, this story has been getting a lot of attention. Yeah. Saints are canonized all the time. I mean, in recent memory, this is one that is getting more attention than others. So I think it's a story that whatever the relationship to the Catholic Church, people are touched by today. You had the clip from his mother. I mean, what a poignant story. A mother who's lost her son, but yet is seeing him receive the highest honor that the Catholic Church can bestow. So there's a lot of aspects to this story that are really remarkable and I think are touching people at a moment when we're looking for stories that make us feel good.
Kathleen, thank you very much for this.
You're welcome.
Kathleen Sprouse-Cummings is a professor of history at the University of Notre Dame, the author of A Saint of Our Own, How the Quest for a Holy Hero Helped Catholics Become American. She was in South Bend, Indiana,